I'm going to be discussing my mother-in-law, Oma Adler, Rosy Adler, as she was known. And she grew up in Germany, in Frankfurt am Main. And her father was Rabbi Dr. Gershon Lange, who was the director of the Samson Hirsch School. They lived in an 18-room house and always had guests. She grew up in a very prestigious family, and people came from all over to ask shilas. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and he put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, which nobody did in those days, especially in Germany. And unfortunately, he died at age 54. And the mother was 48. She was a very intelligent lady also. She had four daughters, and Rosa was the middle one. Four daughters and one son. The youngest one was a son. And she had to marry the girls off. And Rabbi Yaakov Rosenheim, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was very active in the Agudas Yisrael in Vienna. And my father-in-law was also very active in the Aguda. And the two of them would work on the Hatzalah Rescue Fund and pack packages and food for the Jewish people who were, wandering around. This was shortly before Hitler's time. So he made the shidduch. That was a wonderful shidduch, actually. Both of them they complemented each other, and they were a very happy couple. After the marriage, they moved to Berlin, and they were financially well off. I think he did real estate. He did well, and they had a maid for the children. And then Hitler came along, and it was Kristallnacht. They came looking for her husband, and he got a message, do not come home. Meanwhile, the Nazis came to the house, and she entertained the Nazis with cake and schnapps, and she was very sociable and friendly, and eventually they left. So she knew that she had to get out. She packed up some stuff. My husband was the third son and the youngest of the boys, and my sister-in-law was the only girl, and she was the youngest. And my mother-in-law sent the middle two boys to their father. She apparently had somebody who would take them, and he was on the run. And she took the oldest son and the daughter, who was the youngest. She took them, and they traveled, and they traveled, and they traveled, and eventually they came to Amsterdam, and they got papers from the family, this man who was a Russian. He used to come very often to their house, to the Gershon Lange house, and he was really a fan of Dr. Gershon Lange. And he's the one who was in America. He married a very rich woman, and they lived on the Upper East Side, and he sent the papers for them. So they had papers, and they boarded a ship in Amsterdam. They arrived in March 1939 in America. They had to start life anew. They had to learn the language, and she was always very optimistic and forward-looking, and she did what she had to do. It was really surprising that she could do. She did cleaning in houses. He sold eggs, and then if he had a job, he would have to quit on Friday, because if you didn't work on Shabbos, he was a furry at one point. He did fur, and otherwise you had to move on and not, you won't have a job. So they had a hard time, and they lived in Washington Heights. They, of course, were part of the German community, Rabbi Breuer's shul, and she was very active in helping people. People came to her, and she was very active also later on at Shaare Zedek Hospital. She welcomed many refugees to her home. She also worked for a cook for the yeshiva here in Washington Heights. And when her son, Gershon, opened up a day camp in Muncie, she was the cook. And then she also had a business. I don't know if you've ever heard of Adwi Kosher Stuff. Well, this was just Adwi, a firm, and they produced shampoos and cosmetics for beauty parlors. And her idea was to take Adwi and provide kosher for Passover cosmetics. And that was very successful. And she did that from her home. She packed packages for people, especially from out of town. People locally just came to her in her house, and she schlepped all that to the post office. There was no UPS in that day. She mailed the packages all over. There was shampoo, mouthwash, toothpicks, lipstick. She made her Pesach very early. 2 weeks before Pesach, her house was ready for Pesach. And it was amazing. When I got engaged or married and I came to their house, I couldn't believe what the house looked like. 2 weeks before Pesach. Well, my house was a hegdish, before Pesach. The day before it was screaming and moving and kashering and everything was done. She always used to come to us for the Seder because they lived in the neighborhood and we lived in the neighborhood. And she didn't want to go to Muncie where the Seder would last who knows into what hour. So she always came to us for the Seder. And it was always a pleasure to have her and to have my father-in-law. She was always calm and optimistic and always had a smile on her face. She always was just always smiling and always happy. And even when things were not so great, she was very dignified, also very dignified looking. She always felt that you had to look good. And she always did look good. She was really a very positive person. Her husband died, and she eventually went to live in an apartment that her son in Muncie made for her. Then she passed away in Adar, I remember. Adar, the 28th of Adar. And she was really a very special person, very dignified and always optimistic. Her neshama should have an aliyah and should be a melitz yosher for the whole family.